Tournament officials plan for a lot of things: crowd management, court assignments, security logistics, media scheduling. They build elaborate infrastructure around predicting where the people will go, which courts will fill up, and which players will require extra attention from the operations team. They have done this for years. They have systems. They have protocols. They have playbooks built on decades of running professional tennis events at the highest level. What they apparently did not plan for, what no playbook in existence was prepared to handle, was a practice session causing more crowd chaos than the actual tournament matches. Eala has not yet played a competitive point at the 2026 Miami Open, and she is already the most talked about person in the entire building. She has the WTA in full scramble mode, tournament officials quietly rethinking their court assignment logic, and the global tennis media falling over itself trying to find adequate language for what is happening. And it is not a match. It is not a title run. It is not a trophy ceremony. It is practice at a pre-tournament warm-up, and it is drawing the kinds of crowds that tournament executives normally reserve for center court finals. If you are not yet paying attention to Eala, allow this to be your wake-up call, because the rest of the world already is, and it is not slowing down. Let's establish what a practice session is supposed to look like at an event like the Miami Open, because the contrast between that baseline and what is actually happening makes this story land with the full force it deserves. A handful of spectators wander past. Maybe a few dedicated fans find a spot near the fence and watch quietly for a bit. The player hits for an hour, works through some patterns with their coach, stretches, and disappears back into the locker room. Nobody adjusts their schedule. Nobody moves across the venue. Security does not have to rethink their positioning. There is no camera equipment. There are no crowds 3 rows deep along the fence. It is background activity at a tournament where the actual matches are the main event. That is what a practice session looks like for almost every player at the Miami Open in 2026. Almost every player. And then there is Eala. Her matches and even her practice sessions regularly draw massive crowds, a reflection of both her extraordinary popularity back home and her ability to connect with supporters wherever she competes. When Eala stepped onto the practice court in Miami, fans had already been there for over an hour waiting for her. Not waiting in the sense of casually drifting over when they happened to notice the schedule. Waiting in the sense of securing spots along the fence early enough to guarantee a clear sight line, filling whatever bleacher seating existed near the practice court until there was no room left, and then standing 3 deep behind those seated because the seated spots were already gone. Phones came out. Cameras started rolling before she had hit a single ball. The atmosphere, the energy, the noise level, the sheer density of human beings gathered in one place was the kind of thing you normally associate with a stadium court hosting a quarterfinal between 2 seeded players. Except this was practice. Except no match points were being played. Except the player at the center of all of this is ranked 29th in the world and has not yet won a WTA Tour title. Players ranked higher than her were practicing in the same complex, at the same time, in front of a fraction of the audience that gathered around the court where a 20-year-old from Quezon City was warming up her ground strokes. Read that again and let it sink in, because it is the detail that crystallizes what is happening here better than any statistics can. Players ranked higher. Players with more titles. Players with longer careers and bigger trophy collections, practicing at the same time, in front of a fraction of the crowd. That is not a normal situation. That is not something that happens based on seedings or rankings or any of the traditional metrics the tennis world uses to allocate attention and resources. What is happening at that practice court in Miami is the fans making a collective, spontaneous, entirely independent decision about who deserves their attention, and then organizing themselves around that decision without apology, without coordination, and without asking the WTA's permission. Unlike last year when she arrived as a complete unknown, Eala is now considered the biggest crowd drawer at the entire Miami Open. And the timing of her return to this city has been nothing short of cinematic. Before she even stepped on a practice court, she made a fitting stop in South Beach, reuniting with Miami Heat head coach Erik Spoelstra on Monday, March 16th. The Miami Heat posted the moment on social media, and the caption said everything, just two powerhouses repping the Philippines at the highest level. The two Filipino sports figures first met in 2023, when Eala was just 17 years old. Now she is 20, ranked at a career high, and walking back into the city that made her famous as an established force in women's tennis, and a three-time NBA championship coach is publicly standing in her corner. That is not a footnote. That is the opening scene of a sequel, and the production value has only gone up. Eala enters the 2026 Miami Open off the back of a round of 16 finish at Indian Wells, where she fell to Linda Noskova and is projected to climb to a career-high number 28 in the new WTA rankings. Now seeded 31st, she enters this edition with a first-round bye and could face a potential rematch with Iga Swiatek, who also has a first-round bye as early as the third round. But the stakes on this particular return to Miami extend well beyond match results and bracket projections. They extend into ranking mathematics that give this tournament an urgency that no other event on the 2026 calendar can match. She is in danger of losing the 390 points she earned from Miami in 2025 points that account for one full quarter of her current total. She will need another deep run to maintain her position on tour. The WTA ranking system operates on a rolling 52-week format, which means those hard-earned points from her historic semifinal run last year expire the moment this year's Miami Open begins. An early exit could see her tumble from the high 20s all the way outside the top 50, losing nearly a quarter of her total ranking points in a single week. The most ideal result, the championship, would propel her into the top 20, a landmark that would have seemed impossible for a wildcard qualifier just 365 days ago. The stakes could not be higher. But before we get to what this tournament means for her ranking, we need to revisit exactly why the city already belongs to her. Because the story of how Alex Eala came to own the Miami Open before she had even won a match here is one of the most extraordinary origin stories in recent tennis history. Last year's Miami Open marked a historic breakthrough for Eala. She defeated Grand Slam champions Jelena Ostapenko, Madison Keys, and Iga Swiatek en route to a semifinal finish before bowing to Jessica Pegula. And that impressive run propelled her into the WTA Top 100 and ignited a milestone season. A 19-year-old from the Philippines arriving as a wild card, ranked 140th in the world, so far outside the seeded draw that she was not expected to make a headline, let alone make history. What she did over those 2 weeks was not just impressive by the standards of her age or her ranking. It was statistically unprecedented. She became the first wild card in living memory to defeat 3 former Grand Slam champions in straight sets at a single WTA event. 3 of the most decorated players of their generation, all dispatched in straight sets by a teenager no one in the global tennis audience had been asked to prepare themselves for. She reached the semifinals before falling to Jessica Pegula in a 3-set battle that finished with Eala being embraced by a crowd that had spent 10 days falling completely in love with her. By the time that tournament ended, she was ranked 75th in the world, and the Filipino sports community had found its Manny Pacquiao for tennis. She has continued her giant-slaying ways throughout 2026. On her way to the quarterfinals in Dubai, Eala defeated current world number 7 Jasmine Paolini for her first top 10 win of the year. At Indian Wells, she was dominating Coco Gauff in their round of 32 clash, leading 6-2, 2-0, when the 2-time Grand Slam champion retired due to injury. These are not the results of a player who got lucky for 2 weeks and is being carried by a celebrity narrative. These are the results of a legitimate top 30 tennis player who happens to also be one of the most compelling human stories the sport has ever produced. The tournament infrastructure itself has had to acknowledge what is happening in real time. And the most significant acknowledgement came from Miami Open Tournament director James Blake himself, a former top 10 ATP player who knows better than most what unusual attention looks like when it arrives. Blake, speaking publicly ahead of the Miami Open, confirmed his intentions directly. He said that last year's event was a bit of a coming-out party for Eala, given that she came in as a wild card and produced such extraordinary results. and that the international interest in her has grown so dramatically that the tournament is simply going to need her on center court. Because in Miami, a city built on international culture and community, it is going to feel like a home match for her. That statement from Blake is not promotional language. That is a tournament director issuing a public correction. Both Eala and Brazilian sensation João Fonseca generated massive crowds at the 2025 Miami Open following their breakout performances, but tournament organizers, caught off guard, had booked them into smaller stadiums with lower capacity, which created a serious problem. The stands overflowed. Fans who could not get in were turned away. People watched from outside the venue. And everyone in the tournament management world took note. Blake has said plainly that he will not repeat that mistake at this year's edition. The bottleneck at the 2026 Australian Open, when Eala's first-round match was assigned to a court that was never going to hold the crowd she generates, creating a visible, public traffic jam inside one of the sport's most prestigious venues. Put every tournament director on notice. Blake heard it. He learned it. And he is applying the lesson in real time in Miami. The sport is being forced to develop a framework for allocating resources that accounts for cultural significance and fan mobilization capacity, not just ranking points. Alex Eala is forcing that conversation whether the WTA was ready to have it or not. The Pinoy Army, the name that has become shorthand for her organized fan base, is not a casual supporter group. These are people who arrive at tournaments with flags and banners and matching shirts. These are people who stayed in the stands at Indian Wells until midnight, covered in winter coats and blankets, cheering in the cold as a match that started late ran past the clock. These are people who made the Australian Open's crowd management situation a talking point inside the sport. And these are the people who have made a specific city in Florida feel like a home crowd for a player from Quezon City, Philippines. The numbers that have been accumulating around Eala's career at this point are not the kind that fit neatly into traditional tennis analytics. When the BNP Paribas Open at Indian Wells posted a day-in-the-life training video featuring Eala on their official social media channels, it became by far the most watched piece of content they produced all year, approaching 100,000 views. Not a match highlight, not a trophy ceremony, a training video, performing like content from a player who spent a decade building a global following. The pre-tournament press conference numbers from the Australian Open told the same story in purely numerical terms. Eala's press conference generated nearly 196,000 views. Novak Djokovic's generated roughly half that. World number one Aryna Sabalenka's recorded around 9,000 views. Eala's number was more than 20 times larger. These are not comparable figures. They are not in the same conversation. They are the kind of numbers that make marketing executives stare at their screens and start recalculating everything they thought they knew about where the attention in this sport actually lives. Sky Sports lead presenter Georgie Salmon captured the gap between Eala's ranking and her actual star power with a directness that was as refreshing as it was accurate. Speaking at a Sky Sports tennis event in London, Salmon said that in terms of appeal and the crowds that follow her, Eala might already be the biggest star in women's tennis. Not almost. Not arguably. Might already be the biggest. She went further, describing one of Eala's earlier 2026 tournaments as being like a pop concert, like Taylor Swift was playing fans screaming, an atmosphere she said she had rarely seen replicated at any tennis event she had covered. That is the scale of what is happening here. Dubai specifically provided one of the clearest illustrations yet of what Eala does to the economics of a tennis venue when she enters it. She sold out all of her matches during her quarter-final run there. Not the final. Not a special promotional event. Her regular tournament matches sold out a venue that had been operating at normal capacity before she arrived. Coco Gauff, one of the most recognizable names in the sport, commented on it directly, acknowledging that Eala's presence had produced something even the established names at the top of the draw had not managed to replicate with the same consistency. That is a two-time Grand Slam champion giving credit to a player ranked 30 spots below her for filling seats in a way the traditional hierarchy had not. The commercial world has been watching all of this with the kind of focused attention that tends to precede large investments. Eala's Nike relationship, which began at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, where she trained from the age of 13, has evolved into something that extends well beyond standard endorsement territory. Nike does not feature players in headline promotional spaces as a courtesy. They feature players who they believe will be central to the story of the sport for the next decade. The fact that Eala, who has yet to win a WTA Tour title, is being positioned in that company says everything about what the commercial machinery surrounding professional tennis sees when it looks at her trajectory. Former American professional Sam Querrey said on a widely circulated tennis podcast that Eala might currently be generating more global curiosity than Aryna Sabalenka. That is not a fan talking. That is someone who lived inside professional tennis for years and knows what unusual attention looks like when it is real. Steve Johnson, another former American professional, put it even more directly, Eala is the biggest draw in women's tennis right now. Not qualified, not hedged, just stated. John Isner connected it to something the sport has been trying to solve for a long time, the question of how to reach new markets and new demographics that traditional tennis marketing has consistently failed to penetrate, pointing to the door she has opened into Southeast Asia and the broader Filipino diaspora as something that does not close once it opens. More than 10 million Filipinos live outside the Philippines. Approximately 1.7 million of them are in California alone. Miami's South Beach has a substantial Filipino community that was activated once by Eala's 2025 run and is primed to respond even more loudly now that she arrives as a seeded player with a track record instead of an unknown wildcard. Kim Clijsters, a four-time Grand Slam champion whose opinions carry real weight inside the sport, weighed in on what she sees when she watches Eala play. Clijsters analyzed the technical profile, calling out the big ball, the left-handed game that creates unique angles, and the competitive temperament that allows her to thrive against higher-ranked opponents. She also added something that matters enormously in the context of all the attention and noise surrounding Eala at every tournament now. It is important for Eala to be protected from the craziness that comes with the level of celebrity she has reached. That from Clijsters is not a warning. It is recognition. It is a four-time Grand Slam champion acknowledging that what Eala is navigating, the weight of an entire nation's expectations combined with the mechanics of a breakout celebrity profile, is genuinely unusual and genuinely demanding in ways that rankings and match preparation alone cannot address. Despite being just 20, Eala is already known for how well she handles all of it. Her interactions are always genuine, and she consistently shows real appreciation for those who support her journey. She told reporters after a late-night match at Indian Wells, a match that went nearly 3 hours and finished just before midnight with a still sizable crowd roaring in the cold desert air, that for her fans to make the effort to stay up late, stay in the cold, and cheer for her only added to the emotions. She did not treat it as a burden. She treated it as a privilege. She has said she did not even look at the draw during her Miami 2025 run because she did not want to know what was coming next. She just kept winning. And when asked directly about returning to Miami and what this tournament means to her, she was clear-eyed and composed in a way that tells you everything about who this person actually is. She said that Miami last year was a beautiful time, that it was the start of all of this, but that since then she has achieved a great deal, grown enormously, had so many good matches and so many tough losses and so much experience, and that all of it has helped her build confidence, self-esteem, and the knowledge that she belongs at this level. She knows she belongs. The crowds filling practice courts before the tournament has officially started are not going to argue with that.